Hey, my name is Nathan. I'm 31 years old, and I live in a third-floor apartment in a low, brick 6-unit building on the east side of Morrow, Ohio, a small town about 20 miles outside Cincinnati that most people drive through on their way to somewhere they'd rather be. The building is old enough to have settled into its opinions about the weather. It expands in August and tightens in January, and complains about both. I have lived there for 4 years, and I know the sound of every pipe in the walls and every step on the staircase in a way that I know is unusual for someone my age, but does not feel unusual to me at all. I work in building maintenance. I manage a small portfolio of residential properties for a company called Greystone Management. 6 buildings, 41 units, 1 part-time assistant named Denny, who is 22 and tends to lose his keys at least twice a week, and once, memorably, sent a tenant's maintenance request to the entire company contact list. I spend most of my days doing what that sounds like: patching drywall, replacing fixtures, clearing blockages, diagnosing whatever in a building has stopped working correctly. I carry a bag with 4 kinds of screwdrivers: a voltage tester, a level, silicone sealant, and a phone that mostly rings when something has gone wrong. I don't mind the work. There is a satisfaction in the fact that most problems in a building have a clear answer. Something is broken. Something is misaligned. Something has been ignored long enough to become a crisis. But all of those problems are solvable if you know what you are looking at and you take the time to look at it properly. The work teaches you something that took me a few years to fully understand, which is the difference between a cosmetic problem and a structural one. A cosmetic problem looks alarming and is usually fine: a hairline crack in paint, a door that swells in humid weather, a hinge that squeaks. A structural problem might look like nothing at all: a slight give in a floorboard, a wall that doesn't read quite plumb, a door that sticks in the wrong season. These small things are the evidence of something happening underneath, something in the load-bearing parts that hold everything else up. The work teaches you to stop trusting what's obvious and start trusting what's fundamental, what a building actually depends on, as opposed to what's merely decorative. I have thought about this distinction a great deal in the months since the note. My days run on a schedule I didn't consciously decide on so much as arrive at through repetition. I wake up around 5:45 when it starts getting light, and I lie there for about 10 minutes before I get up. I've stopped setting an alarm because there is nothing in my apartment that requires sleeping through. I make coffee. I drink it standing at the kitchen counter and check the work orders on my phone. I leave at 6:15. I always check my door twice before I go. I have done this since I was a kid, and I cannot tell you the origin of it. Only that it takes 2 seconds, and the door has never once been unlocked when I check the second time, and I check anyway. I drive to the first building. I work until 5 or 7, depending on what the day turns out to be. I come home. I make something quick or heat something up. I fall asleep reading and wake up with the light still on. I am not going to tell you I was lonely. That is not exactly the right word. I had Denny and Roy across the hall, who was 73 and had formed strong positions on every sports team in the state of Ohio, and the work, which gave shape to the days and left me too tired most evenings to think about what shape they might otherwise have had. But I will say that there were nights when I would stand in my kitchen heating up soup and realize that I had not had a real conversation with anyone in 2 or 3 days. Not a text or a call, just ambient human exchange. And I would feel the absence the way you feel a tooth you keep pressing with your tongue that doesn't quite hurt but is still there. I had made my peace with the quiet. I am not sure that making your peace with something is the same as being all right with it. 3 years before any of this happened, I was with a woman named Claire. We were together almost 2 years. She was specific and exact, and she never said a thing she didn't mean. which I liked about her even when what she meant was difficult. She was offered a position in Portland, a good one, the kind that doesn't come twice. I had just taken on a third building for Greystone and was still learning the operations. I told her the timing wasn't right for me to leave. She understood. And then she left. And then she stopped calling quite as much. And then it was over in the way things end when nobody officially ends them. By degrees, by silence, by the slow accumulation of distance until neither person quite knows how to cross back. She left a coffee mug on my shelf when she came for her things. I kept it. I cannot entirely explain this, but I kept it. I had gone on dates since then, a few. They were fine. Nothing was on the line. And then, on a Tuesday morning in late October, I found a note slipped under my door. I almost missed it. I had picked up my bag and I glanced down, and there was a folded piece of paper against the baseboard. No envelope, no name on the front. Just a piece of paper that turned out to be the back of a grocery receipt, handwriting small and slightly tilted to the right. Hi, I'm your new neighbor. Apt 4B. I know this is going to sound strange. I almost didn't write this, but I watch you leave every morning. I wanted you to know, and I'm sorry if that's unsettling. I'm not dangerous. I'm also not entirely sure why I wrote that last part, because it probably makes this more unsettling. Ava from 4B, I read it twice. I stood in my doorway for a long moment, holding a grocery receipt with a confession on the back, and tried to figure out what to do with it. The unit beside mine had been empty since September, when the previous tenant moved out. I knew someone had moved into 4B about 3 weeks back. I'd seen the lights on late, and once, just before I fell asleep, I'd heard a child's laugh through the shared wall, thin and high and uncomplicated. The kind of sound that makes a building feel like more than a collection of walls. A week earlier, I'd found a piece of paper slid under my door. A crayon drawing of what was either a dog or a very confident rectangle. I'd assumed it was the child. I'd put it on my refrigerator because it seemed like the correct response. But this was different. This was an adult, apparently watching me leave every morning, and apparently deciding I should know. I told myself I had work orders to get to, and the sensible response was a brief polite note back. Something that acknowledged it and closed it at the door. I had gone halfway to the kitchen counter to find a pen when I thought about that parenthetical. I'm also not entirely sure why I wrote that last part. And I stopped. It was the kind of thing you add when you realize mid-sentence that you sound strange, and instead of starting over, you just keep going and tell the truth about the strangeness. That felt like someone worth knocking on the door of. I almost didn't, though. I want to be honest about that. I was tired. I had a full day in front of me, and Denny had already texted about a situation at the Maple Street building. I stood there for another 10 seconds and thought, this is not my problem. This is just my neighbor. The polite thing is the brief note, and then we both move on. And I was about to do exactly that when I picked up the grocery receipt again and read it one more time, and the word that stopped me was watch. Not noticed you leave or heard you leave. Watch, present tense, ongoing, and the I wanted you to know after it. Not an apology, not an explanation, just the straight fact that she had decided I deserved to know. I put my bag back down. I knocked on the door to 4B. She answered in about 10 seconds. Brown hair pulled into a bun with a pen stuck through it. Gray university sweatshirt, slightly too big, over dark work pants. Her eyes were a little red at the rims, not freshly, more the way eyes look after a night of not quite enough sleep for too many nights running. She was holding her phone, and the moment she saw me, she closed her eyes briefly in the expression of someone who has sent a text they cannot unsend. Hi, she said. Hi, I said. A small face appeared from behind her knees, looking up at me with significant evaluation. Maybe 5 years old. Dark hair, same as her mother. She studied me for a long moment with the gravity of someone forming a professional opinion. "That's the careful man," the girl said to her mother. "Harper," Ava said. Harper did not adjust her expression. "I'm Nathan," I said to both of them. "I live next door." "I know," Ava said. "I'm so sorry about the note. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to be strange. I just thought maybe it was better to say something than to keep not saying something, but then I wrote it and it came out exactly like what it was, which was a person telling her neighbor that she watches him leave every morning." She stopped. "I understand if that's uncomfortable. Why were you watching?" I said. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "We moved here from Columbus 3 weeks ago. New building, new sounds, new neighborhood. I have some anxiety, and in the mornings it was bad for a while. And then Harper noticed that you leave at the same time every day, 6:15, without fail. She started watching for you from the window. She glanced down at her daughter. She started calling you the careful man because you check your door twice before you go." Harper nodded, confirming this. "It became a kind of routine," Ava said, "for both of us. I know that's not your problem. I'm not trying to make it your problem. I just thought you should know someone on the other side of your wall was watching you leave every morning, because that seemed like something a person should know." I thought about that. "Does it help?" I said. "The routine." She looked at me with a slight shift in her expression, like the question was not what she'd been braced for. "More than I expected," she said. I nodded once. "Your door sticks in the lower left corner," I said. "It's the frame settling. I can fix it in about 20 minutes if you want." She blinked. Yes, thank you, if it's not any trouble." "I'm the maintenance supervisor for the building," I said. "The building is what I'm for." I came back that afternoon with my bag. The door took 15 minutes. Harper supervised from approximately 4 inches away, asking me the function of each tool as I used it, and when I finished, she showed me the crayon drawing that had slid under my door. "Its name was Gerald," she said, "and he was good at running, which was his best quality." I said that seemed like a useful quality in a dog. She agreed, with the certainty of someone who has considered the matter thoroughly. I left at 4:30. Ava said thank you from her fixed doorway. I said any time. I meant it. I wasn't sure what else I meant yet. The weeks that followed accumulated the way I've since come to understand these things accumulate. Not through any single large moment, but through a series of small ones that only make sense when you look back at the whole structure rather than any individual piece. About 10 days after the note, I was in the parking lot on a Thursday afternoon with my phone pressed to my ear, working through a situation at the Maple Street building. A tenant was claiming mold damage and threatening legal action, and I was on my 3rd call of the hour trying to figure out what I was and wasn't responsible for, when I noticed Ava on the exterior staircase watching me. Not in a surveillance way, in the way someone watches when they can see you're in trouble and they're deciding whether it's their place to offer. I got off the call. She came down. "I don't mean to intrude," she said, "but I worked at a property management company for 2 years before I went remote." "What are you dealing with?" I told her. She listened without interrupting, which I noticed as a specific quality. Then she asked me 3 questions. When the complaint was filed, whether we had records of previous maintenance in that unit, what the inspection timeline looked like. She was precise. She knew the relevant statutes. She walked me through the documentation I needed and the order I needed it in, methodically, while Harper sat on the bottom step drawing in a small notebook. "Thank you," I said, when I'd finished the notes on my phone. That was genuinely useful. You looked like you were about to abandon property management and become a shepherd, she said. It surprised a laugh out of me. She looked briefly surprised herself, like she hadn't been sure it was going to land. Harper, without looking up from the notebook, said, "We don't have a shepherd." "I know, baby," Ava said. "To me, she's very literal." "It's a good quality," I said. Ava smiled, a real one, not the careful, polite kind she'd had at her door the first day. It lasted only a moment, and it changed her face entirely. I went upstairs and sat with that smile for a while in a way I did not fully examine at the time. A few days after that, we passed each other on the staircase on a Saturday morning. She was coming up with groceries. I was heading out to a job. And we stood there for a moment in the stairwell with the bags and my tool bag between us, and she said something dry about the third step from the top, which was creaky, and I said I'd been meaning to get to it, and she said she'd looked up the repair and it wasn't complicated, and I said I knew, but Denny had been using it to tell when people were coming up, and she laughed again. That was all. 40 seconds on a staircase. But I thought about it twice on the drive over. 2 nights after our talk in the parking lot. Her smoke detector began beeping at 11:15. I know the sound, low battery, that specific nagging interval that is somehow worse than an alarm because it never fully startles you. It just slowly wears you down. I heard it through the wall and gave it 5 minutes, assuming she'd handle it. At 11:20, I heard a chair being dragged across a floor. A pause. And then more beeping. I knocked. She opened the door looking mortified. The chair was in the middle of the kitchen. Harper was standing on the couch in her pajamas with both hands pressed over her ears. The detector was still complaining, about 12 feet above the floor. "I can't reach it," Ava said. I stood on the chair, changed the battery from my bag, and the beeping stopped. Harper removed her hands from her ears and announced with considerable dignity that she had handled it very well. "You did great," I told her. "I know," she said. Ava put her hands over her face briefly. Then she looked at me and said, "I'm making coffee." "It is the wrong hour for coffee. I don't care. Do you want some?" I stayed for about an hour. Harper fell asleep sideways across a floor cushion in the absolute way small children sleep, without ceremony or transition. Ava covered her with a fleece blanket, and we sat at the kitchen table with mugs between us. I noticed the apartment in the quiet. One framed print still leaning against the baseboard, unhung. A box in the corner with the flaps folded back, but the contents still packed. Children's drawings on the refrigerator, more of Gerald, and something that looked like a house with an enormous chimney and 2 stick figures outside it, and several portraits of what I eventually understood was a family of competent-looking rectangles. The apartment had the specific quality of a place someone had moved into practically rather than fully. They were here, and they were managing, but they had not yet decided to stay in the way that means hanging things on walls. She told me about the work. Medical coding, detailed and quiet and completely portable, which was the entire point. She told me she was from Columbus, originally. She talked around the edges of why she'd left in the way you talk around something when you are not sure yet whether the person across the table is someone who can be trusted with the interior of it. I told her about Denny and the contact list. She laughed until she had to put her mug down. I told her about the tenant at the Maple Street building who had called 3 times about a structural failure that turned out to be a window he'd been opening incorrectly for 6 months. She laughed again, and this time she did not look surprised that she was laughing. When I left, she said goodnight from the doorway. I went to my apartment and sat in the dark kitchen for a while. This was a thing I was starting to do. There is something I understood about that apartment the more time I spent in it. A building tells you what it needs if you know how to read it. The stuck door, the beeping detector, the creaking third step, These were cosmetic. They were solvable, with 20 minutes and the right tools. But there was something else in that apartment that was a structural thing. Something in the load-bearing parts. And I am not a sentimental man, but I recognized it, because I had been looking at structures my whole life. The framed print on the floor. The unpacked box. The way Ava sat with her back to the wall and her eyes on the door even when she was relaxed. These were not the signs of someone who had just moved. These were the signs of someone who was still deciding whether to. I didn't say any of this out loud. I just kept showing up. About 3 weeks after the smoke detector, I knocked on her door on a Sunday afternoon with tools and asked about the framed print. She looked at it for a moment. Then, at me. "I don't know which wall," she said. I said, "Show me the room." We spent an hour on it. Harper participated in the decision-making with strong opinions about height and what she called the looking angle. We held the print against 3 different walls. Harper vetoed 2 of them for reasons she articulated carefully and that I could not entirely argue with. When it was hung, all 3 of us stood back and looked at it. A watercolor of a landscape, soft greens and a low sky. Ava said nothing for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "That's the first thing I've put on a wall in a long time." Harper said, "It's good." "It is," I said. We ate dinner that night at the kitchen table, takeout I'd picked up, her idea. Harper's choice of restaurant, which was the place 4 blocks over that did grilled cheese in 7 varieties. Harper took the selection process seriously. I had the sourdough version. Ava had the regular. Harper had the one with tomato soup for dipping, and ate it with a deliberateness that I found I wanted to watch for a long time. After Harper went to bed, Ava made more tea, and we sat at the table with the print visible in the other room from where we were sitting, and she talked more directly about Columbus than she had before. Not the whole story, just enough of it. A man named Derek, 4 years. He was never cruel in the obvious ways, she said. He was polished. He was reasonable. He just had a very organized idea of what her life should look like, and she had agreed with that organization for a long time because disagreeing was harder and louder and cost more energy than she always had. She had started reviewing her own opinions before she said them in front of his friends, started apologizing for things that weren't mistakes. One day she noticed Harper, 4.5, doing the same thing at a dinner table, and that was when she understood that she was out of time. I couldn't let her think that was what being a woman looked like, Ava said. I couldn't watch her learn to make herself smaller and tell myself she'd figure it out later. I said, "You don't have to explain why you left. You don't owe that explanation to anyone." She said, "Everyone keeps asking, though." I said, "Then everyone keeps asking the wrong question." She looked at me steadily for a moment. Then she looked at her tea. I picked up the takeout containers from the table and carried them to the recycling. As I passed her, she reached out and touched the back of my wrist, not catching it, not holding it. Just one moment of contact, deliberate and brief. The kind of gesture that means something without saying what it means. I went home. I sat in my kitchen in the dark for a long while. I thought about Claire's mug at the back of the cabinet. I thought about load-bearing walls. I thought about the difference between what looks like it holds a structure up and what actually does. 6 weeks after Ava moved in on a Saturday afternoon, I was in the parking lot with a clipboard when a gray sedan I didn't recognize pulled in. Late model, clean with the kind of intentional regularity that is itself a message. A man got out, late 30s, pressed shirt. The blazer collar turned up against the November cold. He carried a stuffed rabbit with a pink bow. He looked up at the building with the expression of a man who has already decided he is better than everything he is seeing. I stayed where I was. He spotted me and offered the easy nod of a person accustomed to being accommodated. "Hey," he said. "I'm looking for Ava and Harper. I think they're in 4B. "Building access requires a resident buzz-in," I said. "I'm the maintenance supervisor. Visitors wait in the lot." His smile adjusted slightly, just a recalibration. "I'm Harper's father," he said. "Derek, the system still applies," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he took out his phone. I watched him wait. I watched his expression when she answered, the way it arranged itself into something carefully assembled, warmth and patience in the right proportions. I have seen that expression before. I know the difference between someone performing decency and someone having it. One of them requires upkeep. He talked for a few minutes in a low, reasonable voice. Then, Ava came down. She had Harper on her hip, which meant Harper had asked to be carried, which meant Harper had heard his voice and gone quiet in the way she sometimes did, not distressed, just still, like she was making herself lighter. Derek said all the right things. He had driven from Columbus. He just wanted to see his daughter. He was worried about Ava. This was a big change, he said, and he wanted to make sure she was really managing. He said the building was old. He said he wasn't sure this was the right neighborhood for Harper, which he delivered with a smile that meant he was absolutely sure. Ava held Harper a little closer. Then he said, "You know you've never been great at managing things independently. That's not a criticism. I just think there might be other options that would be easier for you. For both of you." Ava went very still. Harper looked at her mother's face. I moved, so I was standing beside Ava. Not in front of her, beside. There is a difference between those two positions, and it matters. I didn't say anything. I just put my feet where they were. Derek noticed the repositioning. His expression did another small adjustment. Ava said, "Derek, I'm going to ask you to leave." He started to respond. She said once, politely, because Harper is watching. Her voice was entirely level, not cold, not raised, just clear, the way a level is clear when something is true. "I know what I need. I'm doing what I need to do. If you want a schedule to see Harper, we can arrange that through the right channels, and I will respond in good faith, because Harper deserves that from both of us. But coming here without notice to tell me how I'm managing, that's not how this works anymore." Derek looked at me. I said, "She told you to leave." He held it for one more moment. Then he said something soft to Harper, private, just for her. Harper said nothing. He handed the rabbit to Ava with the careful gentleness of a man performing patience in public. He walked back to his car. He left the lot without gunning the engine, which I noted, the restraint was also part of it, a demonstration of how reasonable he was being about all of this. When the car was gone, Ava let out a long, slow breath. Harper said very quietly, "Is he coming back?" Ava said, "Not like that." No. Harper thought about this with the seriousness she brought to important things. Then she said, "Good," and wiggled to be put down. Ava watched her walk to the stairs. Her hands were trembling slightly, not dramatically, just the small physical fact of adrenaline running out. I said, "Do you want me to put a chain lock on your door? It engages faster than a deadbolt, harder to talk your way around." She looked at me. There was a long pause, and then the laugh came, brief and a little surprised, the way it always was, like she kept forgetting she was capable of it. "Yes," she said. "That would be good." I put the chain lock on Sunday morning. Harper supervised with thorough attention and asked me the purpose of each step. Why that particular screw? Why the chain was that specific length? Whether Gerald the dog would be able to operate it? I answered every question. When I finished, I was standing in her doorway. It was mid-afternoon, quiet, Harper asleep in the back. Ava leaned against the frame. She said, "Thank you for yesterday. You handled it," I said. "I've been afraid of that conversation for months," she said. "I kept thinking, what if I fall apart? What if he's right and I can't actually do this?" She looked at the chain lock. I didn't fall apart. "No," I said. "You were very precise." She was quiet for a moment. "Nathan," she said. I stopped. "Why do you keep showing up?" I had a whole sentence ready about smoke detectors and door frames and professional responsibility to the building. I had it fully formed. I was 2 words from saying it. I said, "You needed things fixed. That part is true. But that's not why." She waited. I said, 3 years ago I let someone leave because I kept telling myself there would be a better time to say what I actually meant. And there wasn't a better time. There never is. I spent a long time after that being fine. Genuinely fine. Not in a lying to myself way. Just in the way that fine is the word you use when you've made your peace with something smaller than you'd hoped for. I stopped. I looked at the chain lock, not at her. And then there was a note under my door on a Tuesday morning, and when I knocked on your door I saw you standing there, looking like you were bracing for one more thing to go wrong, and I thought, I don't want to wait on this one. I don't want to spend the next 3 years being careful about the wrong things. She was quiet. She said, "I'm not in a great place." "I know," I said. "I have a 5-year-old who watches people leave every morning because she's trying to figure out who stays." "I know," I said. She said, "You check your door twice before you leave." "Old habit," I said. She said, very quietly, "Harper calls it making sure." I looked at her. She stepped forward. She put both hands on either side of my face and kissed me. Once. Briefly, and then she rested her forehead against mine. I put my hands on her arms. We stood there in the doorway without saying anything for a long moment. She said, "I watch you leave every morning because you are the most careful person I have ever seen, and I needed to see that for a while before I could trust that it was real." I didn't say anything. Whatever I might have said would have been less than that. Harper's voice came from the back of the apartment, easy and awake, calling for her mother with the calm confidence of someone who fully expects to be answered. Ava pulled back. She looked at me once, and then she went to her daughter. I walked back to my apartment. I turned the lights on. I sat in my kitchen with the coffee on and the light on, and the window open a crack to the November air. And I did not fall asleep until it was late. 8 months later, the building on the east side of Morrow, Ohio, looks roughly the same from the outside. The brick is the same. The 3rd step on the staircase still creaks, though I got to it eventually, on a Tuesday in March, while Harper issued technical commentary. Roy across the hall still has opinions about the Bengals. Denny recently found his keys in his refrigerator between the orange juice and a container of leftovers, and I have decided to stop trying to understand how these things happen to him. I still leave at 6:15. I still check my door twice. Now I check 2 doors before I go down the stairs. Mine first, then the one to 4B, which I pull gently shut so the noise doesn't carry back to the bedroom where Ava is still sleeping. Harper calls this making sure for everybody. She says it the way she says most important things, matter-of-factly, as a statement of obvious process. Ava took on a second client in February. She works at the kitchen table in the mornings while Harper is in kindergarten, and in the afternoons they hold what Harper has named Snack Parliament, a rotating discussion of important issues conducted on the front step over crackers and apple slices. The agenda is usually Gerald-related. though there have been recent sessions on the topic of whether Oscar from Harper's class should be allowed to attend snack parliament. The vote has been tabled. The framed watercolor is still on the wall in the other room. The unpacked box is gone. There are more prints now, and a plant on the windowsill that Harper named Professor, and crayon drawings on my refrigerator, which is something that happened gradually without anyone deciding it should happen. The table doesn't wobble anymore. The chain lock is on both sides of our shared wall. Claire's mug is at the back of my cabinet. I did not throw it away. I did not need to. It is just a mug at the back of a cabinet. It doesn't mean anything large anymore, and I do not need it to mean anything large, which is not the same as forgetting it is there. Some things you keep not because you are holding on, but because letting go would have been a performance, and the thing itself doesn't require that of you. The note is in the drawer where I keep my lease and my emergency contacts and my certificate from the electrical safety course I took in 2021. I kept it because it is important, not in a sentimental way, in the way that load-bearing things are important. In the way the thing that holds the structure up is important. I used to leave at 6:15 and come back to exactly what I had left. Quiet kitchen. Same light. The same careful distance between where I was and where I had somewhere along the way stopped expecting to be. Now I leave knowing that on the other side of the wall there is a woman who is going to work at her kitchen table, and a 5-year-old who is going to kindergarten and who has decided very recently and with great authority that her best friend Oscar is actually fine and may attend snack parliament on a provisional basis. I leave knowing the print is on the wall and the plant is in the window, and Professor the plant needs water every Thursday, which Harper has taken personal responsibility for. I checked the door twice. I always have. Maybe it took longer than it should have to understand that making sure is not the same as being afraid. Maybe the habit I have carried since I was a kid. The 2 seconds, the second check, the door that was always locked and that I checked anyway, was not compulsion. Maybe it was the particular kind of care that cannot be explained, except by the fact that some things matter enough to check on twice. Some things are worth the extra moment to be sure. There are mornings when I come down the staircase and I can hear Harper on the other side of 4B's door telling her mother something important about Gerald, and I stop for a second on that fixed third step. And I think about a grocery receipt and 4 lines of handwriting and 1 parenthetical that a woman almost left out and didn't. She watched me leave every morning. She needed to see that someone was careful before she could believe it was real. I knocked on the door. That was enough to build everything on.